Hi, a few days ago you took 2012 AP exam. I'm going to do right now question number 3. As you noticed, here's the picture, the graph, and it says the first question is find the value of G2. Well, let's go back to this. Well, if that's the case, G2 is equal to from 1 to 2 of f of t dt. And if that's the case, we're looking at the area right here. That's all we're doing, because the area, the integral represents the area under the curve. We know since it's below, it's going to be negative, and the width is 1, the height is half, so 1/2, 1 times half is negative 1/4. Now for the second question, g of negative 2. Well, let's look at g of negative 2. Again, we're going to look at the area. But this time it's a little different, and we'll talk about it at the end. The area of this piece is 1/2 of the semicircle, area of the circle, which is pi r squared, which is 1 squared, because the radius is 1. But since it's below, we're writing it as negative 1/2 pi. And the area of this piece, 3 times 1, half of that is 3 over 2. So that's the total area. So let's look what I would be saying. From negative 2 to 1 of f of t, the area would be this. But that's not what the original function says. It says from 1 to x. And as we know, from a to b of f of x dx is equal to negative from b to a f of x dx, in this case dt. Well, if that's the case, let's put a negative in front, so it's negative 3/2 plus 1/2 pi. And that's g of negative 2. Let's look at the next question. What is g prime of negative 3? Well, let's work with this again. If g of x is equal to, from x to 1, f of t dt, and g prime of x is equal to d dx from 1 to x of f of t dt, which happens to be f of x, is equal to g prime of x. Well, here's your graph of f. Well, g of negative 3 is right here. And what's the location of that point? This point will be negative 3, comma 2. So g of negative 3 now would be g prime of negative 3 is equal to 2. Now let's look what g double prime is. Well, if we look here, g double prime of x is equal to f prime of x, because g prime of x is equal to f of x. Well, f prime of x represents what? Slope of x. Well, let's look at the slope here. Rise over run, 3 minus 1, 3 minus 1 over negative 2 minus negative 4 equals 2 over 2, which is 1. So, in conclusion, we're going to say g double prime of negative 3 is equal to 1. Okay, next part. Find the x-coordinate of each point at which the graph of g has a horizontal line. Okay, so let's continue what we have. G of x is equal to the integral of x1 f of t dt. Well, if that's the case, g prime of x, because we want to know when g prime of x is equal to 0. Because we want g prime of x is equal to 0. The horizontal line. Well, if that's the case, we're left with f of x. So we're going to look at where f of x is equal to 0. Well, if we look here, f of x is equal to 0. And we look here, f of x is equal to 0. So what we're going to say is f of x is equal to 0, or should I say g prime of x, which is equal to f of x is equal to 0, at x equal -1 and x equal 1. Now let's continue the representation. It's -1 and 1. Well, before -1, all of this piece, it's positive. And right here, it's negative, below the x-axis. And as we continue, it's again below the x-axis. So let's look what that means in terms of g prime of x. According to the slope increases, then decreases, and then continues to decrease. So what we can say is, at x equal -1, we have a maximum value. At x equal 1, we have neither a max nor a minimum. And I justified my answer right up here. Now for the final piece. For -4 to x to 3, find all values in which a graph has a point of inflection. Well, points are inflection. Let's review what that is. Point of inflection when g double prime of x is equal to 0. Well, let's review what we have already. We know g of x is equal to the integral from 1 to x, f of t, dt. We know g prime of x is equal to f of x. We know g double prime of x is equal to f prime of x. So let's look at the slopes of f prime of x. Well, f prime increases here, and then decreases all the way to here, then it increases, and then it decreases. So where does the slope change in each case? Well, slopes change at x equal -2, x equal 0, and x equal 1. So now let's look at all of these 3 points. X equal -2, x equals 0, and x equal 1. Well, at -2, the slope is increasing. Then to 0, it decreases. Then from 0 to 1, it increases. And then from 1 to 3, it decreases again. This is talking about now f prime of x. But we know f prime of x is the same thing as g double prime of x, talking about the concavity. So let's look at what we have here. This is concave up, concave down, concave up, concave down. Look at the 3 points where the concavity would have changed. So we have 3 points of inflection at x equal -2, comma, 0, comma, 1. And that should be all the points. The official version of the answers did not come out yet, so I have no idea, but this is the way I worked it out. Have a great day.